Ah, great. All right, welcome everybody.
Thank you.
How is everyone doing? Do you want to just have a little bit of a check-in and we'll just settle into the space after that slightly strange arriving?
Hi.
Hi, Eddie, how are you?
I'm good. It's very wet and rainy and windy where I'm at. Otherwise, I'm good. And I'm wondering, do we have a sense of how long this meeting is going to go for?
Yeah, we're scheduled for 90 minutes and David should be able to come in about half an hour's time. So the plan is just to open up, we can check in with each other, we could do a bit of a breakout, we could do a breathing practice if you wanted to. So that's the plan, Eddie. Does that work for you?
Yeah, I can make that work.
Okay. And you're welcome to jump off early if you need to. People come and go. Just let us know if we're breaking you
Good.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Michelle, how are you?
Oh, well, I feel a lot more awake now. I was on early. Hi, guys. I'm from Sydney, Australia, so it's quite early here in the morning. My body tries to catch up. It's, the energy is filling up now. And lovely to see two Carolyns on the screen in the names. So I'm feeling, I think the day will be a good day. It's been raining here for a couple of days and now it looks like the sun's come out. So thanks for asking.
Yeah, I don't normally get to see you, Michelle, because I'm normally on the earlier calls.
Yes.
So it's kind of a treat, and the clocks have changed so that in the States they've just changed and they haven't in the UK where I'm calling in from. So
and we've changed here. We've changed here, I think, for the next 2 weeks, and then we change again, and game of tennis.
Yeah.
And I lovely to see you.
Coming in from Florida. So I don't know if you want to check in, Mercedes, or if you're just quietly recovering and happy just to be here. It's up to you.
No, thank you. Thank you for opening the space. I'm just recovering from the flu, so my voice is a little, as you probably hear, but I'm good. I'm happy to be here and glad to meet these new faces and looking forward to the session.
We're very happy to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So what would people like to get out of this evening's gathering, or this afternoon, or this morning, or wherever you are, Michelle? It's early for you. What are you showing up with on your mind? What are you curious about for today?
I'm new to this, and I read whatever brief information was on the website about this new training, and just thought I would join the conversation and see what there was I could learn. In the moment, I'm not sure I have any questions. I think I was maybe preparing for some kind of short talk and then a Q&A or something, just a little more curious about the methodology and
Well, that's great, and you're very welcome. And Mercedes is echoing a similar kind of inquiry. This is David will speak to this when he comes, and he may or may not bring slides. We tend to improvise quite a lot, which is kind of core to the work in some ways. Michelle and Steph are long-standing folk in the community, and we've done all of the programs, I guess, the three of us.
Oh, you have?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we can I'd just like to give you a taste of what happened this morning. So there's a morning session and an evening session, and that's if you're, I guess, US East Coast. I'm in Arizona, so now I'm on Pacific, so it's an early morning. But what David was looking for us to explore was how do we help clients open up and be interested, willing, and curious about the way this sort of work is done. And so the way we experienced it was for us to think about what's a change that we wanted to have in our lives, and how are we sitting with that right now, and explore how does that come up for you? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Are you denying it? Or, is it a change that you've been sort of putting on the back burner? And so we did in breakout, we spent some time really exploring what does that change, what sort of change, how does that make you feel with that change? And it's to gain a sense of compassion for the client who may be resistant to this new way of working. And so that can give you a sense of the sorts of ways that we're exploring showing up differently. It's a little difficult if you don't know what the showing up differently is. And that's where Carolyn and David are our co-leads in doing this next phase. So I don't know if Carolyn, if given that that's the way David had people experience it firsthand, it's a little different. We can just share however you feel best to, given where you're at.
Yeah, I think, and when we're such a small group, we don't need to break out, and it may help our newcomers just to step in a little bit and say a bit about the work itself and what's different about it, how we experience it. So Michelle and Steph and I can maybe share a little bit. You may or may not have noticed, depending on how much you've been tracking us, that 2 programs have come together recently and will open in April for this program called IDX, the ID Experience, Integrative Development Experience. And the 2 programs that have come together are integrative development that the 3 of us, I think, did in 2020 during the pandemic, in a rather extraordinary moment where David was quietly developing a new program for working somewhat in the organizational space, very much in the moment, in the space of the moment, very much around meeting the client where they are and really paying attention to what wants to happen in that moment. If we sit with the field and hold space from a stance that is quite far back, really, I think of it as field work. I have to say, we all have our own language. David tends to encourage us to very much meld what these methodologies are all about on the one hand with who we've been, what we do, who we work with on the other. So the 3 of us are quite different. You 2 will be quite different. I've come out of a somatics, yoga, meditation, arts, culture background. I know my friends and colleagues here have very different backgrounds that they can speak to. So we all tend to practice uniquely, I would say. And yet we have a really common kind of base and strength in the work. And so what David did in 2020 was rather remarkable. The pandemic had hit and he just said, is there anyone out there who's been through narrative coaching with me who would like to jump into a program that I haven't designed yet? And to his surprise, 70 odd people said yes. I think he thought would be a group of 15. I don't know if you guys remember this. Mm-hmm. And so 70 odd of us all showed up in January 2020 or whenever it was. And we jumped into this program that we made up as David made up as he went along, which is kind of an essential part of the work. So one of the big themes that David's exploring in the Moment Institute monthly sessions beyond coaching experience is readiness. So we sit here and we talk and think quite a lot about, well, what would it be to be ready rather than prepared? What would it simply be to sit quietly with people, attending to what wants to be seen or surfaced, witnessed, honored? What happens if we don't have solutions? What happens if we don't try and fix anything? What happens if nothing is broken? What happens if we allow grief to be in the air? If we acknowledge that trauma might be in the system? What happens if we read the space and the field systemically? Is there anything that others would like to, Steph and Michelle, what comes up for you when I begin to try and describe ID a little bit, and then we'll go to NR, which is the other aspect of the IDX. What would you two feel like saying about this? And Eddie and Mercedes come up with questions for us in a moment as well. What was most important to you about ID?
So just for me, it's the generous sitting with and meeting people where they are, with no judgment, no expectation, just an open heart and a capacity for sensing. Because so many times we use words, but that's not what we're really, the words kind of prevent us from really seeing what is. And so there's, in my experience, it's the pause, it's the, I see you, I can be with you. I think that's what comes up for me.
Yeah,
It's very much in the moment. Go ahead.
I agree with all of that and everything that was shared, and I want to connect to the field. What was important in ID was, more importantly, when with others, it's my field to tend to in the moment, so that I'm not a character in anything that comes across in any moment with a client. And so when the experience of being with myself through the experience of ID allowed the moments to present themselves through the stories, through the sharing of the client.
Yeah, we tend not to ask terribly many coaching questions in this kind of work. I don't know if that would resonate with you, Eddie and Mercedes. We tend to, I share how I see myself going, instead of asking questions about the client's experience of it, of the client's scenario, let's say, of the transactional life of the client or the client's organization, we might well ask, what are you noticing right now about yourself? What are you noticing about your experience? As Steph says about today's breakout, you know, what kind of shift might you be beginning to anticipate or change in your life or your practice? And what do you notice about that? What is it like to share about that? What is it like just to sense into your body and your breath? You're holding your breath about something. Are you anticipating? Are you fearful? What's going on in your system? And to then work with the response that the client generates. Oh, you know, I'm noticing I'm a bit tight in my upper chest, or noticing something a bit twitchy in my arm, and just going there with the client, letting that guide us as we sit together, not knowing what's about to happen. So the training, if you like, equips us to be comfortable. And this is a little bit more of the narrative release side that I'm beginning to go into as I'm seeing you guys nodding. David describes this as the integrative development aspect of this program, and this work is about the outer, looking out into the world, into the client's world, into organizational systems. The NR, the narrative release work, is to work on ourselves, to be in the inner, to be quiet with ourselves, to, if you like, clean up our own act, so that we can sit in uncertainty without firing questions at the client, for example, just for the sake of keeping it going, because we're too alarmed at the prospect that the client might turn around and go, actually, the worst thing about it is my wife just died, or whatever it might be. Right? You know, you can be sitting with an organizational client talking systems, And then you suddenly realize that grief feels as though it's in the field, and you just might make an observation. I'm feeling a coldness, I'm feeling a sadness. What's happening with you? So the kind of inner outer is a really important bit of the way that David's bringing two aspects of work together so that we can be more present, more quiet, more attentive to the field and how we might usefully read it, and how we might be able to detect more intelligently, I might suggest, what wants to happen right now. That had, if we were firing questions, wouldn't really have space to happen at all. But let me pause and ask, I know Mercedes may not want to chip in, but you've got the chat, Mercedes, if you want it. I wonder if anything's coming up, Eddie, as you kind of sit with us and see us in improvisation mode, trying to set the scene for this a bit.
So were you waiting for Mercedes to respond, or?
I'm thinking because Mercedes might want to work in the chat, right into the chat.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes, and let me, I'm gonna grab something and I'm gonna come on the video. Just please
Great.
don't. Because
Yeah,
I feel
great.
kind of
You're
weird with
welcome
such a
to.
small, intimate group and.
Yeah, we
because-
are. I think this is, David will join us, but I don't think anybody else will. So this is it, yeah.
Eddie, it's okay, please, if you want to go first, I can.
No, why don't you go ahead? It's fine.
Yeah, what I'm gathering is that it's more of hold on one second, let me get up here. It's more like you're saying, an improv. You're more presencing with the client. And although I haven't taken the courses, I've read his book, and that's what excuse me, prompted me and interest in this work. I started weaving some of what I've learned in the book in my work, which is more of a human-centered approach, but I use narrative and the storytelling to get to that. I work mainly with CEOs. I'm here in Florida, so I'm working mainly with organizations that are trying to figure out how to address the polarization that we find ourselves in, especially in this state. We have a governor, DeSantis, who has proclaimed that this is where woke comes to die. So anything that has to do with the ESG, equity or sustainability, I'm finding clients to be very antsy about. So that's the context and why I came back to the moment, because I feel that the work that you are doing here is critical, and it's the perfect approach environment that I feel that they need. So that's a little bit of the background. What I'm hearing is the presencing and so forth. When you were talking about earlier about your experiences, I wanted to ask this question because a lot of what I'm asking for these leaders is how do you go towards the fear and the uncertainty versus what's certain, what's predictable. So when you were talking about ready versus prepare for me as a facilitator, even that going towards fear is part of what I'm exploring. So that's what is coming up for me. I'm complete, and thank you.
Welcome, David. How are you doing? Do you need a minute? Should we
No,
just keep going? Are you ready to jump in?
Well, I wish I could say it had a lot of peacefulness on my drive here, but that wasn't true either. So I'm fine. I'm just practicing my sort of turbo state change skills.
Very good. Well, you know, you're in the right place to show them off, my friend.
As always, of course.
So we have Eddie and Mercedes with us, David, who are new to us. So we've just been as a threesome sharing a little bit about our experiences of ID and NR and how you brought them together. And Mercedes is talking around her work in Florida under the kind of shadow of DeSantis. I work in Oklahoma, Mercedes, under the shadow of Governor Stitt. And it's tough there too. And Mercedes, you were asking about, you know, how do you sit with the fear and walk into the fear and the uncertainty? So David, it's over to you if you're ready. Yeah, go for it.
So my condolences, Mercedes, about your where you live. But I just look at them as voices reflective of energies in a global system that's bankrupt and broken in many ways. And so they're just sort of incarnations of the worst parts of that. But so I think, so two things, and I'm going to use an example. I just returned from Australia, where I saw Michelle for the first time in person, just mere hours ago. And I had an occasion through one of our ID students to meet with 3 women who run the gamut of the leadership programs at a big bank. And it's a great example around fear. So the illusion about certainty is we think that it therefore eliminates the need for fear because we're certain. But the things we're afraid of still exist, whether we're prepared for them, ready for them, trying to control them. And so I just say that coming to this from an orientation of uncertainty is actually more realistic. It's more natural. It's more helpful. It's more constructive because you're actually no longer pretending that certainty exists. There is no certainty. It's just these times have made that historical fact more obvious. So I find that the people who are willing to the fear doesn't go away when we feel certain, you know, and so I find that working this way actually to be able to be more prepared than otherwise. And if I think about these 3 women, so I have a very senior experienced leader in the L&D space who's responsible for the top 60 leaders. Then we have the woman who's been dumped on everything else. So it's like 6,000 leaders that she has to create programming for from scratch, Australia's. And then we have a woman who's going to be a facilitator in one of those programs with the 6,000. Each fundamentally different readinesses for this conversation. The woman at the top could hardly wait to get started because she could have a thought partner to reinvent what leadership even means for the bank. The woman in the middle is trying not to drown in trying to organize programming for 6,000 people, most of whom are asking for a slightly modified version of what they've always had because they're pretending like nothing's changed. And she's overwhelmed just by the volume, let alone in her mind, this is a direct quote, the stupidity of what they're asking for. Or the short-sightedness of what they're asking for was her direct words. And then the woman who is just a facilitator is the most junior of the 3, and she had the hardest time hearing any of this because she just wants to go do her job in a program that she recognizes. And so for me, the fear just starts with our assessment of what can they pay attention to. And then it's finding ways to expand their sort of attentional field. And I find that the folks who are more able to breathe through paying attention, the more open they become to what's possible. And the biggest hurdle for most of them is undoing everything they've been taught since kindergarten, which has actually made them less agentic, less courageous, less aware of themselves, less aware of others. And so it really is not about skills at all for most of them. any senior executive would have gone to any number of very expensive competency-based programs. The ones who still struggle, it's not because they need another program. They need the emotional, spiritual, psychological maturity to be in this kind of environment that we're in. So I'll stop there, but those are some of my observations.
Hmm.
And Eddie, what did you check in on? I heard just the tail end of what Mercedes was checking in on, but what was important to you, or what is important to you?
So that's a big question, but more specifically, what are you referring to?
In terms of what brought you here today, what did you share with the group already that feels important to you now?
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to really share very much so
Okay.
far. So I think so. What brought me to the meeting today is I've had a curiosity about your methodology for a couple of years now. I actually spoke with you a couple of years ago
Oh, whereabouts?
on the phone.
Oh,
It was during the pandemic. I was looking at continuing educational stuff. I think I came across your work or a podcast or something because I saw in what you were talking about, I saw my own experience in what you were talking about that arose out of it mirrored some of the experience I had with my personal and spiritual developmental stuff that I've done in terms of work on presence and I was also trying to find my way. I was in some ways I'd been working my way out of a coaching model, which was a couple that I was trained in, and I was trying to just get clear on what was more authentic and true for me and what was my experience. Because I was finding that the coaching models, the A to B model, wasn't really working for most people that I was working with, because for a lot of different reasons. And I found that intuitively over the years I've been, leading groups and doing coaching, that I was just coming into a place of working more intuitively with people. And part of that came from sort of a bit, I would say maybe a Vipassana type of model, where it was, holding, developing the capacity to be with the direct experience in the moment as it's arising, in a kind, curious way, and holding it all, emotionally, psychologically, energetically, and allowing things to unfold and using the information that was arising in that moment, the energetics, all of it, as a way of guiding what was next. And so for the longest time, I think I could see how in my mind I was still trying to fit some coaching model into it. Yet what I was doing was working, And
Yeah.
so I was, then I think when I came across your work, and I just started to see, well, actually, and then also just to say this, there was one of the lead teachers of one of the coaching schools I went off and started his own school, which was kind of similar in some ways to what you're teaching.
And who was that?
Steve March.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah. And so him and I, we were, involved in the same school, for many years. You probably know what that is.
I do.
And so, and the Enneagram and all this other stuff. And so I started seeing these correlations and parallels. And I thought, okay, I think I'm on to something here.
Yeah.
And so I think in some ways it was bringing some validation to what I was experiencing and helping me to come into my own, into deeper confidence about what I was doing. And so I thought maybe it would be helpful for me to deepen into this with others, have more conversations with other coaches like yourself and teachers or Steve. So I was looking at what you're offering and what Steve is offering to see what might be next for my continuing education. And I'm also just starved for contact. I have really not done much for a number of years. in
Yeah.
terms of like
Sure.
educational stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'll just pause there.
Yeah, I'm actually talking to Steve, I think next week, we're went through a mutual student. And we got connected, and I know a lot of the faculty where he used to teach, and a lot of their graduates, and yeah, and so we're just sort of exploring, like, where do we get support for ourselves and what we're trying to do, and how do we extend what we're doing, and yeah, so I just was really intrigued by my first conversation with him, and we're actually going to do a podcast together with Joel Monk of Coaches Rising, and looking forward to that very much. And yeah, so good. Yeah. So what feels important now? Mercedes, were you going to say something, or?
Yeah, I just want to build on Eddie's check-in, because my work has been both in the organizational transformation and change with the accompanying executive coaching. So when I saw went to your website and got the email on this new program, our approach, my interest is now, how do I bring this to the organization at the organizational level? So working with leaders that are leading transformation and understanding or introducing the concept that we need to transform how we transform, how we've looked at transformation. And the concept is bringing a hodgepodge, the same as Eddie, background and number of coaching certifications. I was one of the first, started internal at EY. It was one of the spots when we put together the internal coaching team. And now with where we're at in the world, I'm getting asked to expand from the individual executive coaching to what I call these lighthouse labs, and bringing that metaphor of that transformational leader as a lighthouse. So my curiosity is also how to go from that individual to the transformation piece at the organization and whole system level.
Yeah. So yeah, good. And I think part of this too is I'm just sort of wondering, what I hear in your stories is one that I recognize in part from mine and a number of people on this call, is you start to run out of boxes to stand in or tick, or they all seem not quite yet, or not quite enough. And so one of my clear sort of propositions in this, what we're doing, is that we're not creating a new thing. And so for me, the part of there's a many levels. So in the IDWay program, there's a blending of two bodies of work into one program. That was my epiphany after an unexpected spiritual quest in December, was to come back and say, no, we're not going to do it the traditional way. So we brought together the narrative release, which is sort of the spiritual philosophy that underpins my work, enables us to notice moments of opening, stand with courage with no curriculum, and do a number of things, which is a personal journey with our integrative development, which is, what do you do when you get there? Like, when you arrive in those moments, how do you people take advantage of that? And so we're going to build this as somewhat of a non-program. So it's really about dialogue and explorations, that you would end up with your own iteration or integration of ID for yourself. So each of the 6 of us on this call, ID would look slightly, you would use the same resources to create its own integration based on our passions, our preferences, our backgrounds, our audiences, etc. And a part of this that emerged for me out of my time in Australia through all kinds of circuitous routes was to what you were saying, Eddie, well, actually both of you, about how we don't have places to have these conversations. They're certainly not at professional conferences. They're not at training schools. They're not in ICF. They're just not. And so things like, what if we looked at the world and imagined that there's no such thing as change? That change is a construct that we give to experiences. Like, I think of problems as just realities we don't like. And what if change is, you go to a tree and it's shedding its leaves. It doesn't grieve, well, it may grieve the leaves, I don't know, but it's just doing what it naturally does. And so we create this category called change to bracket things which are actually just part of a natural flow, but it gives us the illusion that we can control it and name it and package it and teach it because we call it change or transformation. And I've been in that space, like you, Mercedes, for a long time. And I've stopped using it. I think it's not helpful anymore. It's helpful to sell because then people recognize it and they think, oh, I get to be transformed. But in reality, I don't think it's helpful anymore at all, because it takes people away from the natural reality of what's happening.
I agree with you, David, and it's I think it's so much the language. I talk about shifting mindsets, but I'm also not realizing that that's already preparing people to change.
And we haven't really found it. So part of the ID journey is we need different ways of thinking about all of this. And so one of my hopes in this new program is, because we're going to be doing more overt work, the kind of work that Carolyn and I did last year on our narrative release program, and both Stephanie and Michelle have done that, is that we can have those kind of deep conversations, like we had some beautiful sharing in the morning session about how do you engage a client, even especially probably, I find people in the business actually get this faster than people in HR and L&D. How do we engage them to approach what they're being asked to do from a very different starting point? Pre-pandemic, there were enough of them where my practice did well. In the pandemic, all that's like tripled in significance and impact, and people need it more now, but are often more afraid. And so that's where the narrative release is so helpful. What kind of healing and holding could they do for themselves that would allow them to stand with their people and not know? And so that I'll just say that. I just feel like that's why this is not replacing OD. This is not a new thing to sell, like positive, intelligent, any of these things. It's like an ongoing psycho-spiritual social community that's bring all the wealth that we've all developed and learned over our life to begin to co-create some things that we need, that we don't even know we don't even know what they are yet. But I think about all of the tools that you learn are basically polished versions of real things I created in the moment with clients, and then said, oh, that seems to work. Let's do that again. And so they're all born out of the field, all of them. And we'll create more together because of who we are and the kind of things we choose to do.
Mercedes, when you were saying how do we walk into the fear, or how do we face the fear, I think, David, what you're bringing in is this point around the community here, that in many ways sitting in spaces like this with each other is how we can actually sustain ourselves, resource ourselves, in your language, David, to do the work. So it's not easy work to do alone. It doesn't have a complex methodology that you go sell, right? It's not got bells and whistles on. It's quiet, serious, spiritually underpinned, hard work on ourselves work. And so the community aspect of it and the space that the MI has made is really important for actually staying in the field, staying with the work, not jumping with the clients to grasp onto the kind of rescue ropes, shooting back into an old way of thinking because it's really scary being out here with that uncertainty. So I know it's true for all of us, that know each other in the MI, that we really resource each other.
I think of an example that I thought of again when I was in Australia, Mercedes and Eddie, that is a small moment when ID showed up. So I did a big project for PwC in Australia for 3 years. And one of the senior partners there, I worked with as part of the firm a lot, and I got to know him well. And he rang me one day and said, you know, I need some time. So basically he was calling because they brought in this group of like young graduates, like in their mid-20s to work on a very special project. One of the young men, I think he was from India, 24 years old and had contracted heart cancer. And I didn't even know you could have that, but apparently you can, and it's fatal and pretty quickly. His invitation was, can you help me? How do I talk to him? Well, I was a hospital chaplain when I was very early in my life. I've done grief work for a long time, but in what category do I place myself to answer his question? He doesn't really want the words. And I said, well, they're going to see you as their father. They're going to see you as their boss. They're going to see you as somebody that they trust and like. They're going to look around when I said, you're going to have to talk to the team, his other 4 or 5 compatriots on this project. You might even have to talk to this young man's parents. You're going to have to talk to yourself. How is it for you to watch this young man you've been mentoring for a year, knowing that 6 months from now, he won't be here? And what about your own mortality gets surfaced in this? And how are you going to be with that? How are you going to be the fact that you're probably one of a handful of partners in the entire firm could even have this conversation because you've done enough work on yourself? How are you going to be with them? And so he was expecting a 10-minute, can you give me a template so I can go have the conversation? I said I could, but that's not really the work to be done here. And, you know, he'd been to all of our programs over this. He'd done so much in his life. And he said, when I had to go away with a blank piece of paper to make some notes for myself after we had that conversation, he said, I learned more about leadership in that half an hour than I had in any program I'd ever been to. And so our conversation took 15 minutes, 20 minutes. It wasn't, and so it's when we break out of these familiar categories of training or coaching or leadership programs and actually help people just be present to what is true and present to them, using what we know and who we are, how do we get them to do that work in themselves so they can show up to feel and sense and notice what's happening for them. And then out of that emerges an opportunity where you might do something to support that. But, you know, I had no way of preparing for that conversation because I had no idea what the topic was until he opened his mouth. Right? He didn't want a book to read. He didn't want a course to do. He didn't want a video to watch. He basically wanted another man about his same age who he in the end, he was petrified. He said, I don't know how to deal with emotions. I don't like death. This brings up bad memories for me about, I think it was his father or mother had passed away. That's the work to be done, right? And imagine then you could form a group of other partners who have similar struggles and he could mentor them. So you just start to see the potential to use an organic moment for his own benefit, but also to see what's actually possible here.
David, and as I'm hearing you, excuse me, and I hear you use the word be or being, which is different. Are we talking, at the risk of labeling something else, but are we talking about this whole vertical development that I'm hearing so much about? Instead of bringing more to leadership, another 5, 7 skills sets to remember.
Yeah.
You're going with what's already in you, trusting, but more leading the conversation, the application of how it impacts your being. I'm not very familiar with it, but it sounds like,
Yeah, again, it's as you hinted, it's not. I think it's a useful distinction, but now it's become a thing that something that people have packaged.
yeah,
It's now ruined, like everything else gets ruined when somebody tries to package and
Yeah.
sell it. But because even if you think about traditional horizontal development, if you think about anything in any of your lives or my life where we've developed ourselves to learn how to do something, a sport,
Mhm.
art, cooking, whatever, you become a different person as you get as you get more skilled and more confident.
Mhm.
And so I don't find that I find the artificial XY axis thing useful as a talking point, but not useful as a whole frame. But if you used that frame, I would say, yes, this would be analogous to the maturity that comes with what they think of as vertical development versus the competency or capability, which is more of a horizontal capacity. So again, most of the work that we do, we have a lot of tools and resources in the program for that horizontal piece of how do I go do something? And the psycho-spiritual maturity to stand still so the moment reveals itself is actually the harder bit and the one that makes all the rest of this possible. And so, like, for example, like even in narrative coaching, I don't tend to invest a lot in gathering information or even asking the client what they want, because most of them have no idea really what they want or need. They might know what's on fire, what they don't like, or what they wish for, and what we're really going to do is will reveal itself when the client is ready. So my job is just to notice what are they ready for now, and how do I help them be ready for what's coming.
And the trick somehow, David, is as they start, as somebody starts telling you about their problems, and
Yeah.
diagnosing their organization, let's say, and presenting symptoms. But for me, the challenge is not to get caught up in that, but to be able to be far back enough in my stance to be able to say, oh, look, this person is telling me many things.
Yeah.
So you might then say to them, so how does it feel to tell me that? What's it like for you to look at it this way? And just not to get caught up with it is if you like, a kind of practice of discipline on one level, depending on one's language and frame for our practice.
Well, and so then the sign of maturity in this work is that in the beginning, the client presents something and you're like way back here, you kind of see, well, it's probably more than that. You kind of wander your way forward and maybe get the client to kind of start noticing, but then they finally arrive and they see that what they were describing is actually not the real issue. This is the real issue. The better you get at this, the shorter that distance becomes for yourself and for the client of kind of folding right into the crux of the issue sooner and sooner. And one of the hallmarks of this work is that in the end of these bigger projects I did, the clients actually rejected me and said, we don't need you anymore. Yes, I've done my job. And we always talk about
Good
that.
job.
We always talk about that in the consulting and coaching space, but then secretly, most practitioners are finding some ways to create ongoing dependencies.
Yeah.
And if we've done this work well, they might need us again. They might need some support or new scaffolding, but by and large, they believe they're doing this themselves by the time you get very far down, which is brilliant. It's how it should be.
And there's a beautiful element in this work, particularly that comes in from NR, although in some ways it doesn't really matter where it comes in from on one level, right? But there's the kind of sense that we bring or the quality that we bring to those moments where a sacrament is invited. You need to release me. Yeah, let's just pay attention to that. There's meaning to be found in that experience of, I'm about to do it actually. So that really rings true for me, that I'm coaching my client to let me go right now after a 6-month engagement that's been deeply meaningful. And so we really kind of pay attention to and honor those very significant moments where something changes. we're mapping and orienting with people. And it also really resonated with me, David, what you said about sort of shortening that gap.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Because you can find that in 20 minutes or half an hour, you've just saved your client 6 months or a year of solving entirely the wrong problems that are just coming up, that have to be constructed, and everybody buys into it. And then you go, well, you know, is there anything else? and you just sit with it, and it will do itself if you can hold the space and read the field well, you know, intelligently somehow.
Yeah, so we find that words like good and bad disappear from the vocabulary.
Yeah.
They just are. And
Yeah.
we find that people will scramble for labels because it makes them feel more comfortable in the beginning. But in
Mhm.
the end, they realize that also comes with blinkers in terms of what they don't see because of their label.
Mm.
And some of the biggest breakthroughs for my organizational clients have been because I stood toe to toe with somebody who completely hated what we were doing. I said, great, tell me some more about why you hate this.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
And of course, it wasn't about hating us. It was about our own fear of being exposed as too old-fashioned to keep up. And I was thinking of one person in particular, who dared to speak up at an orientation meeting with every single employee in the room. And she stood up and said, "This is bullshit. I'm never going to do this." Great. Tell me some more about the bullshit. And because you can hear a pin drop in the room, right? Because she was like a big person in that system. But I don't have a need for her to be right or wrong or anything. This is her experience. And so I said, would you be willing to stay until the end of the orientation, give me the benefit of the doubt for another 90 minutes or whatever it was? And she said, fine. You know, then he sits down like this and like, I dare you to interest me or engage me. And that Janice is in. And she became, in the end, she stood up at the end of when we were checking out. And when I asked her if there were any more comments, and she stood up and she had tears in her eye. She said, "I need to apologize to you." She said, "I'm realizing now by this sitting here with myself, with you, with what we're doing, that I'm just really afraid that I couldn't do this." And she became one of our fiercest advocates
Mhm.
because I didn't try to change her or shame her or convince her of anything. I said, if this is not right for you, then be my guest, don't come. I wish you well, which I did. And so I think people are surprised because they're used to being, I've got to get on the bus, right? The proverbial change bus. So there is no bus. The bus is an illusion.
Mhm. Mhm.
And David, I think
Yeah.
as you talk about, you know, the client, you don't need the client to be right or wrong, right? And you don't want them to need that. But also, I just want to say that I also see that you don't need to be right. I often say that to my clients. I have no interest in being right. I'm just curious. Does this resonate?
Yeah.
What's going on?
Mhm.
I wanna
Welcome to Catherine and Janice. Hi.
Yeah, welcome.
Hey,
And I'm guessing that you're in a place where you weren't aware of the American time zone.
Yeah.
That's
I
okay.
was just about to say, I'm sorry, I must have got the time wrong.
No, you had
Yeah.
were just fine. It's just that America had changed, the clocks went back over the weekend.
Oh,
Mm.
and we changed in a couple of weeks. Kia ora from New Zealand.
Yeah.
Oh, you're in the
We do
UK?
too. Yeah.
Yeah, this
Okay.
is the,
You're very welcome and you're bang on time. It's just a different time than you thought, right?
we've had a fabulous conversation and it is recorded, so you can go back and listen to the parts that you missed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If I were ever nominated to be a god for even an hour, my first act would be to make one universal time.
Good
No
idea.
changes, no nothing.
I'm with you.
Yeah, it just
Good.
drives me mad. Just twice a year when we go through this like 4-week period where people are changing at totally different paces. It's just mad.
Yeah.
Talking about an example of not wanting to unlearn, right?
I know.
Something that was started.
Yeah.
I only have like another 15 minutes because I got the time right, but I unfortunately where I got it wrong was I thought it was an hour, not an hour and a half. If you could, and I'm appreciating the conversation and the feel of it. When you talk about psycho-spiritual. Could you just talk a little bit about what do you mean in the context of this approach?
So I've studied religions all my life, but
Mhm.
when I think about the traditions that I just kept instinctively being drawn back to, I'd say the primary influence would be Taoism and the secondary influence would be Buddhism. But they're not in any religious way. There's not a dogma to any of this. It's just they have some useful frames for what we're doing, particularly around sort of the capacity to notice more, the capacity to act without labels, the capacity for radical presence, deep compassion, and sort of decoupling sort of the mechanical causal relationships that the Western systems often place over things. Like this has to lead to that, and I need this in order to get that. And what we find, to Carolyn's point earlier, was that one of the things that keeps people stuck is there an attachment to their conflation between their narrative and their reality. They think that because they believe they're the same. And so all they see is the things that conform to their narrative. And you could have, and so the spiritual part for me is really noticing our stories while they're in action, noticing the implications of those stories, and allowing ourselves to let go of the story long enough that's where the narrative release comes in, to actually see more than we could see before. And to understand that, again, change is a frame and an ongoing organic movie. And sometimes change is so everything's always changing. You started dying the day you were conceived. So you've never, there is no not change. You can't have not change. Even when you're dead, you're changing, right? Your body's decomposing. And depending on your tradition, it comes back to life in other forms, sometimes with karmic weight, but and so it just helps people. It doesn't always go in this direction spatially, but for many people, they think of it, it just helps you drop into what's actually true and present. What sense and meaning and emotion do you associate with that? What seems to want to emerge here that we might want to pay attention to? And so we're just showing up in a moment in time to ask ourselves, what is needed most right now in this moment? What's available to us? What seems to be calling our attention? How do we support somebody to step into that moment to receive the invitation and act on it? And so it shows up in narrative coaching by the fact that we don't set goals. And for 1,000 reasons, I don't, because one of my favorite reasons right now is because the person who sets the goal is not the person who's going to achieve it. So why do I care what the person now thinks about what they want? Because if they could achieve it, they'd already be doing it. They wouldn't need us. They're going to become a different person in the process of naming and achieving that goal. So I want to know about that person. The only way to know about that person is to put them in motion. You can't learn how to play tennis sitting in your kitchen. You have to be at a court with something in your hand. And yeah, so for me, the psycho-spiritual piece is the maturity to be with what's actually happening, to be fully aware. So like for me, when I talk about that former partner, he said the hardest thing is going to be the first word I say. How do I start that conversation with this young man who's now, his life is going to be tragically cut short? And so I invited him to experience that with me. So we'll call him Bob. So Bob, I'd like you, now that you're going to say this to this young man, I'd like you to tell me that I'm dying. Took him like it's this long silence. He went through all these experiences he was having in himself. And so he started to realize that it wasn't about what to say, it was who did he need to become to even have this conversation. That was the work to be done. Once he moved to a place, I said, have you ever had any hard moments in your life? He said, yeah, one of his now young adult grown children had a drug and alcohol problem in high school. So how do I confront my son with love and not judgment or shame? And I said, so what helped you then? And we kind of processed that for a bit. So he realized it's who he needs to become in that moment to stand and sit with this young man was the most important piece. Once he could move to that place, the words just came quite simply and naturally to him. Does that help?
Yes, very much so. Yeah, something.
And Janice and Catherine, I think you've been with us before. So what's on your mind today? What are you bringing today to our conversation?
My usual curiosity, actually, David. I'm so sad I've missed the first hour.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm just in a really cruisy space. We've just changed seasons. We've had a really disturbed summer, which, you know, weather's been rubbish. We've had a dreadful cyclone. It's all been awful and quite tragic in some cases. But the weather seems to just have calmed. And with it, everything just felt, oh. So I'm just sitting here with this lovely sort of curiosity. And I'm not even annoyed with myself for having missed. I'm disappointed, but I'm not annoyed because I know I can get it again. So I'm just in a cool place. Doesn't happen very often, so it's quite lovely with me.
You're welcome. Glad to provide for you. Part of our plan. Make Janice. Yeah. And Catherine, what's happening for you today? What's on your mind?
Curiosity, definitely. And I have probably a smattering of understanding of the narrative coaching. So my curiosity is building.
Okay.
So yes, hence why I'm here, just to explore further, to have the conversation. And I too am disappointed that I missed the beginning. So I look forward to going back and listening. Well, I'm just here to now just listen and observe and absorb.
All right. Good. And Michelle and Stephanie, like how are you and what are you bringing today? Yeah.
I'll share what came through. Lovely to see everyone. I felt the dance of energy of release and that acceptance of a release in each moment of the unknown. That's what was coming through to me as I was listening. And that that moment, and you can feel the release and letting go just in a moment, when even sitting here listening to others speak or thinking about connecting with others, and then just as my body lets go of what I think at all, it's an interesting, lovely release. And having to be able to feel that in real time is quite a gift to when being with others. So those words, Eddie, of your wanting connection with others, it's been a long time, and yourself, Mercedes, in that unknown, uncertain, and then us as whatever we call ourselves, facilitators. It's just that human way of this way through David's work. Yeah, I was just really noticing myself in all the sharing. So that's what came through, David.
Thank you. How about for you, Steph?
So a few things. one of the things that came up in sort of thinking back on some of the work that we've already done was you have a thought, but it happened, it appeared, and then it's gone. And so it's that present moment of just knowing that it's fleeting, and to practice that real time. And that's where the community is so fun, because you step into the practice and being able to experience that, not in a meditative solo kind of way, but real time in a real application. And I think that this morning, for me in particular, it was the sitting with and the just pausing. And that's that, you know, to Michelle's point, it's that release. It's that there's no judgment. It's just listening and being curious. So, but the thoughts are there, and then they're not. And that's a way to be.
When Michelle, my friend who I was having food with right before you arrived, or right after. No, she came later, didn't she? Yeah, she came later. That's right. Anyways, the one came as you were leaving. Her former career was as an investigative journalist. She's also studied a lot with me over the years, and we were sort of, somehow she was curious about something that I've been wrestling with for a number of years, and she had this really beautiful way of, because I was like, no, I've already resolved all that. Like, I could just feel myself. I didn't want to go there again. And she had this like lovely way of just like bringing in the question this way, as you would as a good interviewer, right? And I, no. And I started noticing myself refusing the question because I didn't want to believe that there was more to process. I'm like, I'm so sick of that topic. And then, but it was amazing because the ways that she was asking in the beginning, once I let go of my defense, I realized they still weren't useful questions. So it wasn't just my stubbornness or my fear. It was like, no, those doors actually are closed. I am complete with those. And then she kind of just made this subtle like shift in the question, hearing me talk, that realized, oh, there's a door I've never quite got. After all those years, I thought, wow. So then I was kind of pissed, like, oh, now I got more to process. So like, oh, can I just sit here in this beautiful afternoon and not do that? Because I thought, okay, so there's very few people in my life that could hold that vigorous of a space. So I'm going to go there and I'm going to say, I think there's something here. And so on the plane ride home yesterday, I was thinking more about that. And then kind of it dropped into the awareness that of a piece of the puzzle that I had never really faced. And so a lot of it is we're just gauging, like, what is this person ready for in this moment in time? I wasn't ready for any of the early questions because I either felt, yes, I am complete with that, or they weren't quite fitting. But there was enough of a reaction in me to them that I thought there's something here. We just haven't found it yet. So that's why I stuck with it, and it was really quite wonderful. So to both of your points, it's like this. Breathe and pause, you know, what's here, and then also, oh, this is what's here. And yeah, and she didn't know, she wasn't aiming towards a certain direction. She didn't know what was here any more than I did. She just could feel that there was something present in the conversation in the room that I was very cleverly avoiding. And then we're kind of just doing this. So yeah.
It's like it's something in some form of a disguise, you know, this invisible cloak, yet it's part of this piece. And it, yeah, you can feel it in your body as soon as. Of course.
And she was strong enough to be able to deal with my being pissed off that she was asking me. You know, then
well, that's the fierceness, isn't it, David? That's the solar fierceness. Yeah.
Totally. And you know, and then I started to really think about in this work, you know, how willing are we to piss off our clients?
Yes, that's such a
They don't
Yes.
teach that in most coaching schools. Yeah,
Yeah.
please, with consciousness, piss off your client.
Yeah.
Or no, actually not, probably more accurately, notice where they're getting pissed off. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's exactly where the rub of the whole issue often sits. And anger becomes, as a secondary emotion, becomes a disguise, to use your word, your words. And so we don't buy into the disguise. We just notice what it might be pointing to and covering up.
Yeah, and we notice the form, not the content.
Yeah, you bet.
Comes to me, David, as you're engaging with this one. Absolutely, you know, anger's in the field. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what's being said, but anger is in the field. It's got something to say. We need to entice it to say its piece
Yeah.
and support this person to be with that anger, not deflect it and run it round the edge of the field until it finds a gap to leave, because they don't want it to be there.
And not attributing it to any person, any cause, anything. It's just present.
We'll fix it, right? We're not going to fix it. It's not a problem. It's
We don't
just
need
in the field.
no diagnosis is necessary. Sorry.
Yeah, and the spiritual piece for me around that is to find neutrality. That's not easy in practice with ourselves or with others, I think. So neutrality is something. It's not a skill, but it's a place. And it's not an easy one to practice from for most of us. It's certainly something I learn about all the time.
I think one of the things that I learned in this last project was sometimes it's just focusing on a word. If the person or the group can't be in sensing themselves, and it could be just a simple word like can't or why. Tell me more about that why. What's around that? What and the more you just keep saying and more and what about, then they can't help but drop in, oh, I saw a shift. Oh, yeah. And then as you say, David, then the reality of what's behind those words comes out. So it's not, there's no threat to it. It's, it's a word. Tell me more.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
I find that.
Yeah, and the paradox of this work is we're actually not trying to get anywhere, to your point, Stephanie. There's nowhere to get.
Yeah.
And then
It's
paradoxically,
more coming home.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's more coming home than going somewhere else, right? So we're not visiting elsewhere. It's coming. Yeah, and there's a great relief and release for clients in that. I mean, we should name that. I think it's important that people feel themselves differently.
And it goes back to, I think, what Mercedes was talking when I joined the call of, how do we help clients face the fear, right? The fear is not in the present moment. The fear is about an imagined future.
Yes.
And in the moment, there is no fear because, and so we're kind of helping them just to be present to it, as opposed to worrying about what's going to happen next.
That's why overthinking is dangerous. And being stuck out there too long. I want to, Stephanie, it was good that you mentioned about words. And do you remember in our project when there was something raised? Stephanie and I were in a project together with a client, and it was with the leadership team. And remember, I was reading out specific words that the whole staff had shared, and we'd broken it down into a list. So this is their story, their narrative, and we just broke them down. And as I shared the words, leadership were being triggered. There was one particular or two words that particularly came through, was the words they're saying there's no clear communication. Yet from the leadership, they were throwing everything at the staff with communicate, communicate, communicate. How dare they say there's no clear communication? We're giving them everything. And then we all just went quiet. And then he said, I said, that's what I think. That's not what they're receiving. And the penny totally dropped just from those 2 words. And that's started to unravel
Hmm.
in a moment. That's how powerful words are.
Hmm. That's great, Michelle. Yeah. One of the principles that brings up for me, Michelle, is that I find in working this way that I have to say much less. Things often come down to keywords, key statements, clear declarations. And people start to realize all of the obfuscation that happens in organization in giant documents, giant plans, fancy PowerPoint slides, expensive curriculums, etc. And it comes often down to just speaking simple truths to each other.
And then if we've done our jobs well, when we leave, they continue to do that with each other. That's the legacy, in a sense, of a job well done.
That was actually one of our measures of success.
Mm.
They create their own common language. And you know, months later, you could hear it. So they did see each other. And they acknowledged each other. So that was a really interesting way to measure success.
When I did the big project for PwC, one of the ways we did that is everybody that wanted to participate, every team that wanted to participate designated a coaching representative that then got extra training with me. And as part of their requirement, they had to do a project for their team to bring this work alive. And there was, to your point, Stephanie, there was a young man who was kind of new in his career. And he said, oh, these people just go on yabbering about all these words. I don't even know what half of them mean. And also, and so erudite and fancy. And so he took upon himself to spend like, I don't know, a week or something and just write all the words he heard in team conversations and things and trainings he went to. And he said, oh my God, it's like pages and pages of these words. And he said, and we're not doing any of them. We're just getting more words. And so he had this like giant boycotting fancy words. And if somebody comes up with a fancy word in a training, even you pointed his finger at me. I'm not doing that. It was great. And then I started thinking about how as professionals, we get so enamored with these fancy words about parts of the brain or our clients don't care, and it doesn't really matter in the end. It's part of our subversive patterns around codependency. Because we know those words and they don't. And so, well, can you go talk and then so I've got a long ways to go, but I've been over the years trying to make more of this as simple as possible. So it doesn't mean that you can have some of the fancy words in the bonus slides, etc. if you want that, because a lot of people do want that, but it doesn't get in the way of learning the basic concepts.
Isn't there an Einstein piece? I can't remember it quite. Make things as simple as possible, but no simpler.
Yeah. Could be Groucho Marx, or I don't know, who knows.
Yeah.
Who knows? Yeah.
And you know, David, as you say that, you know, about words and complexity and codependency, you and I have often talked about this, and I think probably others in the community would agree that, you know, I don't tell my clients I'm a narrative coach. I don't tell them I've done a course in a program in integrative development. I certainly ain't going to tell them what NR is, you know. I just show up, you know. I don't blind them or confuse them with, you know, these words you've come up with, David Trey. You know, and I'm lucky enough to work in a sector that doesn't demand my credentials in certificated form and triplicate on the table before they contract me. So I'm lucky in that sense. I don't face that challenge when
I've been doing ID for 15 years since I started this, and it's rare that I even put those those words in anything that I do with my clients. They don't care.
Well, you know, and one question, David, will be, what in 5 years will we be sitting talking about you know, we're describing what we've been doing for these 5 years just coming.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know what we're going to be describing it as. And I think a lot of us who've come into your programs find that you're kind of naming what is true for us, but we hadn't found the words for it.
Yeah.
You know, there is that sort of deep sense of, oh yeah, that's what that is. And it then helps us to bring that to form with others in a really important way.
Oh, sorry, my Australian time is catching up to me from yesterday.
I can't believe you're doing all this jet setting about. It's mad.
It is, especially if you knew about the person I sat next to on the airplane, you'd have even more compassion for me. So, but anyways, I'm conscious of time. I'm just curious if there's anything else that feels important to any of you for today.
I just wanted to share that some gratitude for kind of reminder about what's most satisfying and fulfilling and beautiful about doing this kind of work. Keeping it simple, having this direct contact with people that doesn't have a lot of abstractions that often become burdensome and become another path for self-hatred even and rejection.
Yeah, sure.
And comparison. And I think that the idea of needing certainty itself, which I think, yeah, we all suffer from on some level, kind of reflects how our trust and our the intelligence that's there regardless of us,
Yeah.
that's unfolding in the moment as we're having this kind of contact and this just being with what's alive in the moment, as you know, and in a really curious, humble. It just feels like that's like living. That's real living somehow for me. It just feels like it's a beautiful thing. Anyway, so I'm grateful for the reminder of this, and partly because I think there's a part of me that's became a little disenchanted with the work in some ways, especially as everything shifted over to Zoom, which is another conversation I'd love to have with other people about that. But anyway, I'll just pause there and say thank you for the conversation today.
Welcome, Eddie. Yeah. Anything else? So we have another one of these in 2 weeks. That one I will be calling in at some unusual times because I'll be in the northern part of Scotland that week. So yeah. So, but yeah.
Can I ask a question, David? Given obviously there's a community here already and people are, experienced in doing work and things like that, this is quite new to me. So is it appropriate for me to be coming along to these without?
It is.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So the primary, the origin story of these events was when we decided to not offer ID and NR separately and merge them. We needed 3 months to kind of redo all that. And so we wanted to create an opportunity for those who either had already signed up for one of the programs or people that said, oh, cool, I don't have to choose, I can do them both at the same time, chance to come meet. And because we only launch our narrative coaching program historically once a year, we've had a number of people come along who are just curious about what we do and so might start with and see instead. And we're creating some things to make it easier for people to start whenever they want, which won't launch until later in the year. But yeah, so everybody's welcome. I mean, some people are brand new to all of this, but are just really curious. We get a lot of people like Mercedes and Eddie, who have long-standing coaching backgrounds, but are sort of just less interested, less inclined towards a lot of what the original trainings were about, and the sort of, and are looking for something more. So again, you'll find you'll recognize a lot of people in the program, regardless of your skill level, your experience level, because it attracts a certain kind of person, a bit of a pioneering spirit, a bit of a nonconformist tendency, a bit of I've done all that crap and I need something, my clients need more. And so particularly for this new program this way, most of the content will recede to the background that you can partake of as you choose. And the bulk of our FaceTime will be done in small and smaller groups, talking to each other, and along with some individual and kind of group assignments. But it's not a program where we're going to teach you ID. We're going to invite you to experience ID from the beginning. I can't teach ID. I can't teach NR really. I mean, we do sort of, kind of, but you're not here to learn ID, because then you'll miss the point of ID. Yeah, and then people go on, and one of the things we're putting in place is so we have about 120 graduates already from these first few years, and so now it's a matter of connecting you with them, finding people with common interests. We've had about, so you can match up with people who are passionate about the same thing you are, to compare notes and help each other out. So you're doing just fine, Catherine. You would be welcome.
This isn't a gatekeeping kind of place, I want
No.
to say. It really isn't. It just isn't. And David often says, people come for me, i.e. David, and stay for each other. And it's just very, beautifully true.
Yeah. I mean, I think about one of my, just as a funny humorous example, I think it's funny. I think they do too. But so we've run a pilot of a program that I'm doing with one of our business partners to use a video platform to help accelerate your skill development. And in that, two people that got to know each other, one was a mastermind convener in our narrative coaching program, and one was a student. They then connected even more deeply as a partner pair in the pilot, doing coaching demos with each other. But one of them is a former a global IT expert / now partner in a Big Four firm, which he's never done. And the other one's a policeman. And they become best friends. You would never put them together in a million years.
Yeah.
But because of the caliber of the conversations, they've started to see they have more in common than they realized. And they've just formed an amazing friendship. And so you're not here, I'm not interested in devotees or people that can, quote David or whatever. I'm here because we need to attract more people who, like us, who want to go do something different in the world. So there's the most common feedback I give the narrative coaching participants. Can't quite say it easily yet with ID, but is I invite them when they're practicing to please stop coaching. Your coaching is getting in the way of what's actually wanting to happen. You're actually slowing the client down because you're trying so hard to coach. So just shut up and pay attention, because you're missing 90% of what's happening, and you're clearly missing, I don't know what it is, but it's not what you're talking about in terms of what the client actually needs to address. And when people, which goes back to Mercedes's question about fear, people stay in the coaching space because they're afraid to be vulnerable to what actually wants to happen. And so when something's trying to emerge, then your narrative coaching skills might be helpful. And the same as with ID even more. And so a lot of the work in early ID is helping people access their innate capacity to learn that they gave away when they started school, for the most part. All right. So thanks for staying on a little bit longer. It's always good to see folks. If we can be of any more support for you in your journey, just let us know.
I have a quick question before we sign off. Is it okay to come to more of these if I wanted to? or-
We can. So we have
Yeah.
one more, the program starts on April 4th, so we've got one more of these on the 28th, and you're more than welcome to come.
Great, thank you.
Yeah,
And there are a few other events on the website beyond coaching experience you can check into. It's not chargeable. It's a great monthly session. Mm.
Thank you for that.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, be well, and we'll see you again sometime soon.
Be well, everybody. Bye-bye.
See you again. Take care.